Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I want to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We are in the very massive Contact Report 150. I recommend everyone goes out to the futureofmankind.co.uk site, Google Future of Mankind, and you'll find the Billy Meyer Wiki. And print this out if you get a chance, or start to take a look at Contact Report 150. I've got 72 pages printed out. It seems like every time I go back over it, I learn a little bit extra, learn a little bit more. Let me start here with Billy talking to Quetzal. Billy says, as is known to you, the American space probe Voyager travels past Saturn and sends recorded images to Earth. This will give the scientists large eyes once more, as was already the case with Jupiter, because inevitably they will have to recognize once more from the recordings that also around this not matured dwarf sun, more satellites orbit than previously was assumed. To my knowledge, it has been argued until now that Saturn has only 10 or 12 moons, although it is true that there are 29 if I omit the Adoniden. The Adoniden are the small fragments of the planet Malona. Our scientists count those fragments, and they say there's something like 60 moons of Saturn, which is in fact not the case. Now, just to give you a little background information about Saturn, I've been doing a little research on that. I thought you might find some of this interesting. Saturn is the sixth planet in order from the Sun. It is the second largest planet in our solar system and is encompassed by a series of thin, flat rings composed of small particles of ice. The A ring is the outer ring of Saturn. The A ring is the outermost of the large, bright rings. The ring's outer edge is maintained by an orbital resonance with two other moons, Janus and Epiphthalmus, which are moons that look more like fragments of the destroyed planet Malona, in my opinion. A resonance in physics is the state of a system in which an abnormally large vibration is produced in response to an external stimulus. Other orbital resonance also may excite what they call spiral density waves in the A ring, which account for much of its structure. Now, I did a little research on this spiral density wave idea, and the density wave theory, or the Lin-Shu density wave theory, is a theory that was proposed by two scientists, C.C. Lin and Frank Shu, in the mid-1960s, to explain the spiral arm structure of spiral galaxies. Now, this theory of density wave theory is also called heavy sound. I find that very interesting. Originally, astronomers had the idea that the arms of a spiral galaxy were material. However, if this was the case, then the arms would become more and more tightly wound. What they're saying there is after a few rotations, there would be no spiral arms anymore because they would flatten out and you'd just have a circle. Now, there was a professor at MIT that said Saturn rings contain a great many spiral density waves and spiral bending waves. And they talk about something called Lin-Bad resonances and orbital eccentricities that are caused by these Saturn's moons. But anyway, the density wave theory is an explanation of why the spiral arms in the galaxy stay there. Even though the inner part of the galaxy is spinning rather quickly, the spiral arms the matter in there and whatnot creates kind of a traffic jam, so to speak, and that keeps the matter in the spiral arms. Now, there's also the B ring. There's a gap between the A and the B ring. I think they call that the Encke gap. And this Enki division is caused by a small moon called Pan. Pan is the second innermost moon of Saturn. And then there's the B ring of Saturn. And before you get to the B ring, which is inside the A ring, we have a division called the Cassini division. Then we have the entire B ring, which is rather large. The B ring is the largest and brightest and most massive of the rings. The B ring contains a great deal of variation in density and brightness. And then inside that we have the C ring and then the D ring. So the Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 were launched in 1977 to take advantage of this alignment that existed among all of our planets at that time. So that is pretty much our information on Saturn. We talked a little about John Paul II during the last show and how there was an attempt on John Paul II's life by another Catholic priest who wanted to kill him and attack him with a dagger. Now, John Paul II claimed that the Madonna of the Fatima was protecting him. Well, this is the Virgin Mary in the Catholic Church, who's looked on as kind of a supernatural figure. Fatima, again, is a place in Portugal where the visions associated with Fatima allegedly occurred. 70,000 pilgrims witnessed the miracle of the sun, in which a spinning disc came out of the sky and cast multicolored lights across the landscape. I assume or suggest that this may have been the Giza intelligences as the source of this vision of Fatima. This occurred in 1917. It's still very well known today. Billy described this pope as mendacious, which means he tells lies, habitually lying, untruthful. And the pope, Billy said, didn't even believe what he was saying most of the time, that he was a bad actor. The second topic that Quetzal and Billy discussed was the Falkland Islands War, which was a 10-week war between Argentina and the United Kingdom. Anyway, Quetzal was telling Billy all these things that are going to happen in this year, 1982. And we listened to an interesting clip on YouTube called Greatest Mysteries of War, the Falkland Islands War. Quetzal also told Billy about a movie that was being made about his life. And they never gave us the name of the movie, but Quetzal stated that people in America were getting impulsed from the Plejaren to make this movie. I think it might be the movie Contact. It's called Contact. If you look on YouTube under Contact Billy Edward A. Meyer documentary, you can find that. We also talked about Menachem Begin and some of the stuff Menachem Begin was up to over. He was one of the prime ministers of Israel, and Billy didn't think very much of him. Actually, he said Menachem Begin was murderly degenerated. And what else did he say? He said mainly it concerns in relation to this criminal interest of the would-be statesman Begin, who will commit a further terrible crime under the eyes of the world public without the rest of the world intervening on these terrible killings. He will invade Lebanon in 1982, and he will command the Israeli military to bomb the Osirak nuclear reactor. And we listened to a couple of very interesting clips that talked about the bombing of the reactor, as well as a documentary called Eagle over Lebanon, 1982 Israeli Operation, which I think this is a extremely interesting documentary. Let's listen to just a little bit of this for a while.
The F-15 Eagle is the tip of the spear that defends the tiny nation of Israel. 80 Eagles serve in the Israeli Air Force, and the pilots who fly them average more sorties than any other combat aviators in the world. They are renowned for being brazen and callous. It is for good reason. Upon the wings of these aircraft and the shoulders of these men lies the fate of the nation. They are the vanguard of a country that is smaller than 46 of the 50 states. A country that has fought 6 wars of survival over the past 40 years. Every Israeli citizen must serve in the military. All are aware of being surrounded by nations that in times past have vowed to wipe their homeland off the face of the earth.
There's no depth and distance from air bases in Israel, and any target to the border is a question of minutes when considering flying a fighter aircraft. We have to bear in mind that it's also the other way around. Hostile enemy aircraft, which would take off from Damascus, from Amman, even from H3. Once it reaches close to our borders and penetrates, it's a question of minutes, sometimes seconds even.
Enemy jets can depart air bases in Cairo and in less than 3 minutes cross the Israeli border. From Damascus, they can do so in 2 minutes, and from Amman, Jordan, just 45 seconds.
Every inch of land here has a settlement, a village, a town, and we have to defend the population. Therefore, we prefer, if it's possible, to fight all the wars outside the Israeli borders. That's the philosophy, and until today, we kept to that.
I'll try to pick back up in that clip in a little while if we have the opportunity. I wanted to read a little bit again what Billy, or actually this is Quetzal, is talking about what's going to happen in 1982. He talks about Begin. He says mainly concerns in relation to this the criminal interests of the would-be statesman Begin, who would commit a further terrible crime under the eyes of the world public without the rest of the world intervening and ending the terrible killings. In the middle of 1982, Begin will demonstrate his true character with full power when he allows an attack with war Gewalt on the capital of Beirut in the country of Lebanon, and allows it to be destroyed for the most part, whereby many thousands of innocent people, women and children will be killed. Now this is pretty harsh words here, folks. I'll just read them to you. Make your own judgment. The murderly, degenerate Menachem Begin will thereby give excuses that will find attention in the UN and in the rest of the world, although behind Begin's action lies hidden nothing else than the lunatic greed for the spilling of human blood, as well as the lust for sovereign power over the entire country and its ethnic groups. Billy even gets harsher here, and he says, he is a cowardly pig and a scoundrel without an equal. I had no idea Begin was this bad, but according to Meyer, he is. My reflection about him has revealed that he is a damn rotten creature who lives entirely criminally, is vindictive and boundless in his cowardice. He is not only a zero, an absolute washout, and a not, but in addition an unparalleled scoundrel, and moreover a psychopath of the same size as Khomeini. And we talked about the Ayatollah Khomei a little bit. Billy calls him the insane Ayatollah in Iran, and he goes on to say Begin is in the same sick hospital as Khomeini, cowardly, deceitful, mean, selfish, power-hungry, psychopathic, validity-addicted, domineering, a megalomaniac who is otherwise burdened with all the malignancies into which a person could have lapsed. He goes on and on here about Begin. Let's pick back up in our clip here, Wings Over Lebanon. This again is the 1982 Israeli attack on Beirut.
Strategy means that Israeli air bases are considered the front line of the nation's defense. Their most potent weapon of survival is the American-made F-15. This $60 million air superiority fighter is the best the world has ever seen. In the past 20 years, Israeli pilots flying F-15 Eagles have racked up over 50 enemy kills to 0 losses of their own. No other pilot-aircraft coupling in modern history can even approach this. Financial constraints and the confines of Middle East airspace create a unique set of parameters for IAF warplanes. Israeli F-15 pilots do not rely on BVR, or beyond visual range technology. Unlike American pilots who are taught to destroy the enemy at the greatest range possible, Israeli pilots do not have the luxury of distance. Instead, they are taught they must obtain visual contact before engaging.
Normally, if you don't build an aircraft in your own country according with your specific needs, then you get something that you pay for, and it really was designed for somebody else's needs. Even if it's a very advanced aircraft for a very advanced country, there are specific problems that you have.
Let me pick back up here in the contact notes. I think this is Quetzal speaking. So not only Beirut will many thousands of innocent children, women, and men die also, but again after that in the future, when this criminal would-be great further pursues his plans for country conquest, while leaders of the world stupidly, incomprehensibly, and even leniently watch him, along with those of the nation which still believes in reparation for the suffering of the Jews during the Second World War. Now, according to the Meyer material here, it doesn't really make sense to have reparations. And I'll go on here. These believers do not understand that a reparation for the infamous actions of the Third Reich is impossible, and that such a reparation can never be made to the surviving relatives and descendants of those who were murdered and slaughtered in the Third Reich between 1939 and 1945 through the indirect orders of the Thule Society by Adolf Hitler and his generals and other leading powers. Okay, let me talk a little bit about the Thule Society. And there's an interesting, I think I have an interesting clip, maybe we can play a little bit of that. The Thule Society was a German occultist group in Munich named after a mythical northern country. According to the Hitler's biographer Ian Kershaw, the organization's member list reads like a who's who of early Nazi sympathizers and leading figures in Munich. The Thule Society was originally a German study group headed by Walter Neuhaus. The primary focus of the Thule Society was a claim concerning the origins of the Aryan race. In 1917, people who wanted to join the Germanic order out of the Thule Society, which was developed in 1918, had to sign a special blood declaration of faith concerning their lineage. Now, Thule or Thule was the land located by the Greco-Roman geographers in the furthest north, and it was sometimes called Ultima Thule. Now, we've talked about this in the Meyer case. This was Hyperborea. They identified Ultima Thule, the Nazi mystics, to be the capital of the ancient Hyperborea. This is the lost landmass in the extreme north. These guys were onto something. They really, really were. Now, there was a U.S. congressman called Loyola Donnelly, Ignatius Loyola Donnelly, and he was a writer and amateur scientist, and he wrote theories about Atlantis and catastrophism And he said there was this ancient society called Atlantis. I will try to see if I can find our clip. I think I made a clip of this. It's called The Dark Fellowships, the Nazi documentary on the Thule Society.
A little-known occult group may have been an inspiration for one of the most terrifying ideologies of the 20th century. It formed a dark fellowship that was established nearly 100 years ago. It seems that its original members believed that they could live below the Earth's surface and fly to distant stars. Their power would be a mysterious substance called vril. They also believed that one day they would take over the world. They came very close. The mysterious group claimed influence in the highest ranks of the German power structure of the 1930s. This dark fellowship may have been a Nazi cult. The stories of history's dark fellowships strike fear into many hearts. But what are the truths behind the stories? Throughout history, there have been secret organizations striving for influence in political circles. But if the bizarre legends about the Vril Society are true, the organization is particularly unsettling.
The Vril Society is the most mysterious German secret society ever in history. They were originally founded before the Second World War, and their influence reaches out even till today.
Its members are said to have included senior figures in the Nazi Party, like Hermann Goering, Heinrich Himmler, and even Adolf Hitler.
The Vril Society were the dark fellowship. They sought to achieve the mastery of the Aryan race.
Before they were able to influence the Nazis, Vril occultists worked in complete secrecy, doing anything to promote Aryan power.
What they did, that ranged from straightforward political assassinations, trying to evoke the spirits of the dead, good old-fashioned, what one might call sexual orgies, and more sinisterly, human sacrifice.
Michael Fitzgerald is one of just a few historians willing to identify the secrets of the Vril Society. Few records exist, but he claims first-hand sources.
Some of my information about the Vril Society has come from direct sources. Some of them swore me to secrecy during their lifetime and have now died.
So he is now free to offer his assessment.
The Vril Society was a group of people founded at the end of the First World War, and it included many people who were to go on to become prominent in the Nazi Party.
Like any secret society, it had its secret practices. But what made the Vril Society so unique?
We'll get back into that clip in a minute. I want to tell 661 I'll probably take calls in the second half an hour of the show this evening. Anyway, the Meyer material says there really can be no reparations made for the people that and the victims and the descendants, but a reparation to the surviving relatives and descendants is completely misdirected because most of the people live in hatred and vindictiveness, as well as cravings for power and in materialism for the purposes of seizing the rule of the country to themselves and subjugating, exploiting, and enslaving the rest of humanity of the country. Thus, the large mass of Earth people live in the wrong mania for an unwarranted reparation for the suffered disgraceful deeds done to their ancestors and predecessors, with which the earth people nourish a very vicious, poisonous, and life-threatening snake in their bosoms. So it will happen that in the month of July 1982, the Palestinian refugees expelled out of their rightful homeland should be forced through the accomplished war events released by Begin, the land that was home to them and which belonged to them for millennia and which brought much death and destruction to them, to have it recognized as Israel, as a state. So anyway, Begin implemented the expulsion of the Palestinians from Beirut. It went on to describe the murder and the destruction. You know, I was alive during this time. I really didn't know what was going on. I didn't really have much knowledge of this. What was going on behind the scenes is very strange indeed sometimes. Anyway, let's listen to just a few more minutes of this interesting clip on the Nazi cult. You know, I'm not so sure it's as dramatic as what this clip says. I don't know that they were as quite as dark as what this clip paints it, but I still think it's an interesting clip.
The darkest side of the vril was undoubtedly their belief, which dates back many thousands of years, that to sacrifice a young child will give more power than anything else if you are turning to the darkness. And that is what they did.
After the First World War, many illegitimate and orphan children lived in Bavaria. Children whose disappearance would go unnoticed. And legend had it that the vril of a child was the most concentrated and most powerful.
They were seen as being gateways between the astral and the material world in a way that adults were not. So consequently, they were ideal victims for human sacrifice.
Well, anyway, I'm not sure. I'll have to do more research, but this researcher thinks that the Thule Society was involved in human sacrifice. I kind of doubt that, but who knows? Maybe it's true. The next topic after Menachem Begin that Quetzal brings up is something called the Oort cloud. And again, this is Quetzal. He's the commander of all of the Plejaren stations in our solar system at this time. He's almost an Ishwish at this point, meaning he's almost a king of wisdom. And he took over in contacts with Billy after Semyase was injured. Remember, Billy's first contacts were with Thoth for 11 years, then Asked for 11 years. Then he had 11 years of a normal life, no contacts. His contacts picked up with Semyase right around 75. I think Semyase was injured right around 1980. And then his contacts picked up with Quetzal and Ptah. Those two kind of went back and forth on that. The official contacts ended in 1995. He gets visits once a year now or something like that. But anyway, Quetzal is about to tell Billy about the Oort cloud. And it says, it probably has escaped your attention, but this belt was in the meantime discovered, and actually by a Dutch astronomer named Oort. In accordance with its discovery, the discovered belt will be called the Oort cloud in Earth's scientific circles. But that's about it, because the connections of this belt to the comets of the solar system are still, to my knowledge, foreign and unknown to the Earth scientists. The Oort cloud, again, is named after this Dutch astronomer, Jan Oort. It's a spherical cloud, predominantly of icy planetesimals, believed to surround the Sun at about 50,000 AU. Planetesimals are one of the small celestial bodies that, according to one theory, or fused together to form the planets of our solar system. This places this Oort cloud way out from the Sun, a quarter of the distance to Proxima Centauri, which is the next star. The Kuiper Belt and the scattered disk, the two other reservoirs of trans-Neptunian objects, are less than 1,000th as far from the Sun as the Oort cloud. So the Kuiper Belt, which is also contains many asteroids, is much, much closer than this Oort cloud, which is way out. Jan Oort made a couple other fantastic discoveries. He discovered that our Milky Way rotates, and that wasn't even known until this man came along. He overturned the idea that the Sun was at the center of the Milky Way, and he is the man, Jan Oort, that also discovered dark matter in 1932, which is believed to make up roughly 84.5% of the total matter of the universe, and whose gravitational pull causes the clustering of stars into galaxies and galaxies into connecting strings of galaxies. So anyway, Quetzal's telling Billy about the Oort cloud. This is again in 1982. Quetzal goes on to say, but the truth is that about 97% of the Solar System comets arise from this belt, like also the planetary bodies passing by this belt, upset the trajectories of the material through the attractive forces, so then these suddenly scramble, which removes isolated larger and smaller objects, pushing them into new orbits around the solar system, where they then appear as comets, while others fly far from the Sun into free space in order to disappear somewhere in the vastness of the universe, often also as migrant dark planets, which will be partly captured again by bigger celestial bodies as satellites and then orbit them far away. So that's the Oort cloud. Beyond the Kuiper Belt, beyond our solar system, Quetzal's telling Billy about all of this fantastic information. He discusses Halley's Comet a little bit. But again, they're saying that 97% of all the comets are cohabitants of the solar system. In other words, these comets come from the Oort cloud. Then they go on and talk a little bit about some of the crazy weather that the Earth is going to be getting, particularly in Europe and Switzerland. They also talk a little bit about some diseases, particularly sexually transmitted diseases, which will be spread around Germany and Switzerland about this time. And I didn't really cover that in detail. Maybe we can come back to that. And then Quetzal starts to talk about the dangers of space travel and all of the related problems related to the dangers of space travel. And I want to talk about that in a second, but I believe I have a very interesting clip that you might find interesting before we get into all that. It's called Space Exploration, Deep Space Disasters. Let's hope this is the clip I'm looking for.
In the beginning, there was darkness, and then, bang, giving birth to an endless expanding existence of time, space, and matter. Now see further than we've ever imagined, beyond the limits of our existence, in a place we call the universe. In space, threats can come from any direction. Meteors from deep space. Invisible but deadly bursts of radiation from the sun. Otherworldly landslides from above. And Marsquakes from below.
outer space is the last place you want to be as a human being.
What makes fire more deadly in orbit than on Earth? What happens to someone exposed to the harsh extremes of outer space?
The saliva, the blood, goes from a liquid state to a gaseous state.
Buckle up and prepare for space disasters. Simply hits the up button in a space elevator. The elevator will bring them to their spacecraft, which will meet them in orbit. They're grateful they don't have to risk the controlled explosion of a rocket launch.
We can now create carbon nanotube fibers that are stronger than steel. And believe it or not, they are strong enough to keep a space elevator afloat in space, so that you can literally climb your way into the heavens.
The 60,000-mile cable is attached to the docking station that revolves at the same rate as the Earth. Just like a geosynchronous satellite, it stays over a fixed spot on the ground. A space elevator would be any astronaut's dream. But the space elevator dream can also turn into a nightmare.
The space elevator has to be anchored to the Earth. But what happens if you have storms and all of a sudden the moorings begin to snap?
With the cable still attached up in space, it will start swinging wildly, striking objects hundreds of miles away in any direction. It's also possible that some type of guidance computer or thruster problem could knock the platform in space off course, snapping the cable at the top. If it happened while a crew is going up or down the cable, they would be in for the last ride of their lives. And the 60,000 miles of cable hurtling toward Earth is long enough to wrap itself around the planet almost 3 times at the equator, creating havoc over a wide area.
It would be not only disastrous and dangerous for the people involved, the kinetic energy of something like that whipping through the atmosphere would be a menace to navigation. So it's going to have an inherent danger in it that any human system has.
This is just one of many potential disasters facing future space explorers. Living in space will also involve grave dangers. Colonies on the Moon or Mars will be faced with threats from all directions, especially above, where sudden spikes of radiation can turn deadly.
If we were walking around on the surface of the Moon, I would say our number one concern should be solar flare. The sun erupts. The protons coming from that flare could kill an astronaut. There have been several flares over the last couple decades, which if we had had astronauts on the Moon just walking around in a spacesuit would have been lethal for them.
On Earth, we're protected from most radiation. Earth's atmosphere and magnetic field are like a protective fence, letting only a fraction of particles through. On the Moon and Mars, you are directly in the firing line. The Moon has no atmosphere or magnetic field. Mars has very little atmosphere and only weak localized magnetic fields. NASA takes the solar flare threat seriously because it has already come close to killing Apollo astronauts.
the Apollo lunar landing crews were quite fortunate. In 1972, in August, there was a major solar flare. There was what they call the Great Solar Storm that happened to just take place in between the Apollo 16 mission in April and the Apollo 17 mission in December of that year. Had that occurred while there was a crew on the surface of the moon, they would have been dead.
Okay, back to what Quetzal has to say about the dangers of space flight. Quetzal says that is correct because at the time we explained to you the dangers of space flight because the conquering of interstellar space isn't as simple as the Earth people imagine it. Free space hides many dangers in itself which the Earth person is still in no way aware of. In particular, the very dangerous kind of space conquering, as is pursued by the Earth people, releases damage to the health of the person. First and foremost, the Earth people have no knowledge about the hazardous body-damaging as well as organ-damaging radiations, which prevail in all of space and pass through it. On the other hand, the realization also escapes them that the human body cannot cope with weightlessness on a permanent basis. That is why it already begins to take on physical and organic damage after 70 hours of a weightless state. If the Earth person, as well as any other race to be classified as space mastering, wants to pursue space flight, then the spacecraft equipment must be adapted to the given conditions in all respects, as well as the spacesuits for the life forms themselves. Space flight equipment and spacesuits must be safeguarded and made resistant by a special insulation shielding layer with regard to the various body-damaging and organ-damaging space radiations and space vibrations. This is the most important factor for the preservation of life in space for the human. As so, it is also the most important factor for the conservation of organic and physical health of the people who move through space with these protective suits. Anyway, I do have a couple people with their hands up, so I better start taking some calls. Let me first bring Eve on the air. Eve, did you have your hand up?
I do. I have a question for you.
Okay, I'll try to answer.
Okay, this doesn't really relate to any of what you're talking about, but I feel that you'll know the answer because I couldn't tell. I didn't have the answer, really. And it has to do with soul and spirit.
Okay.
Okay, so what is the difference? I mean, I know what spirit is, and we have that small fragment of creational spirit in all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Why is not soul used?
Soul really isn't talked about much, if at all, in the Maya material. Soul, I think, is something that is near the solar plexus, and I think it dissipates shortly after death. The real you is your human spirit. It resides in your superior colliculus. It survives between lifetimes. When you die, the human spirit leaves the body and it goes into this band of energy around our planet called the fine matter world or the spiritual realm. And then the universal consciousness takes your previous life memories, stores them in the storage banks, and then you kind of go into a preparation for your next life. And then 21 days after the sperm fertilizes the egg, the human spirit is placed back into the body of a child. In the midbrain, in the superior colliculus, the comprehensive consciousness block comes down, and it gives you a new personality, a new material consciousness.
And a new soul?
Probably a new soul, too.
Probably. I mean, the soul that is kind of like a personality then, or part of the whole material life.
Yes, part of the material life. I think that's probably pretty accurate. So that's why it's not really emphasized too much. I haven't come across it much at all. I'm sure it's mentioned somewhere. I didn't see it in...
I thought perhaps it had something to do around all of the religious stuff that, that is kind of so used. Maybe it's a religious term more.
Possibly. I think it's real, though. It's not mentioned too much. But I think you're right on. Focusing on the human spirit is probably the best idea. What do you think of Contact Report 150? Isn't it huge?
Yeah. Yeah, it's big.
It's very, very... I kind of miss... I'm glad you brought up that question. I'm really wanting... I'm wanting to get back into that kind of material. Thanks, Eve. I'll put you back on so you can listen. There you go. Okay, I have another caller here, 661. 661, you're on the air if you have a question.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is Ahura Mazda. First of all, there was a black horse is seen flying in Saudi Arabia skies. Did you pick up that story yet or not, my friend?
A black horse flying in Saudi Arabia skies. No, I didn't see that.
Yeah, in Jeddah. In Jeddah.
Can you tell us more about that?
The black horse flying Saudi Arabia, the video goes around the globe, showing black horse flying in the sky over Saudi Arabia, has Muslim believing it's the sign from Allah, fabricate or apocalypse. Well, what will you do when the true and incredible sign from God manifests? And it says, I have one question. Are you prepared enough? So, you can go to beforeitsnews.com, beforeitsnews.com, and you should find it under paranormal or just to the main features. And it shows that, and I don't know whether it's hoax or whether maybe it's hubbub. As you know, is they get a lot of hubbub like Phoenix, a lot of sandstorms. So possibly this was the force of the hubbub picked up the horse and on the skies. That's very much possibility. But, you have to see the video. But I advise you don't see it because, I don't know, somehow anything comes from Islamic Nation. There's a virus attached to it, regardless if it's in YouTube or somehow there is some kind of, because I was watching it, suddenly it says click Jack. I don't know, that's a virus. It shows on it, and immediately I shut down my computer and rebooted, and so everything's fine. But, unfortunately that happens. Yeah, you did cover a lot stories, my gosh, from Billy Myers, that he's a famous contactee, that he has being able to contact and basically even get a ride with them, take them above the planet. Am I right or wrong?
That is correct, Ahura Mazda. I appreciate you calling. I want to get back to our clip here about space exploration and deep space disasters. I appreciate both of our callers calling in tonight.
A nearby strike would still send out a deadly shockwave for miles. A 10-foot wide meteor hits with the explosive equivalent of 6,000 to 8,000 tons of TNT. Flying debris could also damage colony buildings beyond repair. and anything approaching a direct hit. There'll be little evidence that the colonists were ever there. It's unlikely that colonists would live anywhere near one of Mars's volcanoes. And the moon probably hasn't seen volcanic activity in the last few billion years. But even ancient remnants of volcanoes could still cause trouble for crews in vehicles.
Both the moon and Mars show evidence of volcanic flows. So we might expect to find there this sort of thing. Volcanic caves. Now imagine driving along the surface, come across one of these, you're not expecting it. That could ruin your day, it could ruin your vehicle. You could be at the bottom of this pit without any way to get up. Even worse would be imagining one of these volcanic caves with a thin layer of volcanic rock on top of it. You move across on top of that, it gives, and down you go.
But not all colony disasters would be so dramatic. Simply running out of supplies is one of the greatest dangers. Since the moon is much closer, emergency supplies could arrive in a matter of days. With Mars, help is many months to years away, depending on how the planets are aligned.
On Mars, if something goes wrong and you lose some supplies, resupply from Earth can be 2 or 3 years away. You think you've got enough to last, if you lose half of it through an accident, you're dead. It's a real problem. I think that means you're going to have more than what you need. You're going to have enough for 5, 6 years.
Living in space much closer to home, on space stations and longer shuttle flights, has already taught us a lot about the dangers of space. And fire is space crew enemy number 1.
The reason fire is such a threat is because spacecraft traditionally have higher levels of oxygen than the atmosphere, certainly in higher concentrations under pressure. They're also filled with electronic equipment. Electronic equipment puts out heat, and often there are sparks and arcs. It's a bad combination.
Luckily, designers have made it easier for crews to put out fires where all of those miles of wire lurk behind the control panels.
This is a mock-up of the Space Shuttle flight deck that we use for training of crews. If you look at the various panels we have, you will see small holes like this at various locations around it. And these are for fire extinguishers, so that if there is a fire behind one of these panels, you can put an extinguisher in there to extinguish the fire.
Andrew Thomas knows a thing or two about fires in space. While on the Mir space station in 1998, a fire suddenly broke out.
All the smoke was pumped right out into the cabin.
Crews hurtled through space in their enclosed craft, desperate to maintain the Earth-like atmosphere inside. Out here, fire is one of the biggest threats. In 1998, NASA astronaut Andrew Thomas is on board the Mir space station with 2 Russian cosmonauts. Suddenly, a fire breaks out. Ironically, the fire starts while cleaning what's known as an air scrubber, one of the filters designed to remove exhaled carbon dioxide and other toxins from the space crew's environment.
All the smoke was pumped right out into the cabin, and so all of a sudden, the cabin in one part of the space station just became thick with a pall of smoke. And of course, all the air handlers then moved all that smoke around the spacecraft, so within about 2 hours, the entire spacecraft was completely filled with smoke. So we had to just wait for the air handlers to scrub all of this contamination out, and that took about 2 days. And we all manifested symptoms of the toxicity of that environment. When there's a lot of carbon monoxide at those levels, you have nausea, a certain amount of confusion, invariably a headache because you're oxygen deprived. It's just a very uncomfortable feeling.
The dangers of fire in space go beyond the fact that you can't open a window or call the fire department. Fire actually behaves differently inside a spacecraft in zero gravity.
What we are seeing is a candle flame. The bottom one is a candle in normal gravity. And as you can see, the flame moves up because buoyancy pushes the hot gases around the flame up. The top photograph is the same candle, but in the absence of gravity.
Columbia Space Park for the module. A mist burn will be initiated here in about 15 seconds.
The hot gases don't move up, and what you have is a spherical flame.
There's the flame. So here's the initial light off for combustion module 2.
So putting a smoke detector on the ceiling, like we do on Earth, doesn't work in space. Instead, detectors are located next to small suction devices that draw air and any smoke or other toxins toward the detector. To figure out just how dangerous fire is in space, Professor Fernandez-Peyo's team performs experiments in the University of California, Berkeley Combustion Lab and on KC-135 aircraft in short bursts of zero-G. In theory, fires in zero gravity should be less intense because the hot gases don't rise, which means cool air isn't.
Okay, let me get a little bit back into the contact here and what it's saying about the dangers of space travel. I mean, we here on the Earth are very primitive still in our space travel, and we don't have a lot of knowledge about how dangerous this is. For example, Quetzal says, in particular, the various dangerous kinds of space conquering as pursued by the Earth people releases damage to the health of the person. First and foremost, the Earth people have no knowledge about the hazardous body damaging as well as organ damaging radiations which prevail in space and pass through it. Radiation is the complete process in which energy is emitted by one body, transferred through some intervening medium or space, and absorbed by another body. Radiation in space takes the form of subatomic particles, for example, from the sun, as well as from sources in the Milky Way galaxy and beyond. These high-speed particles tear through the DNA molecules, splitting them or damaging the instructions they have encoded for cell reproduction. The damaged DNA can lead to cancers and other diseases. The magnetic field generated by the electric currents in the Earth's liquid iron core extend far into space, shielding our planet from 99% of this harmful radiation. And our atmosphere also provides additional protection somewhat equal to a slab of metal 3 foot thick. Also, Quetzal talks about the dangers of weightlessness. On the other hand, the realization also escapes them that the human body cannot cope with weightlessness on a permanent basis, which is why it already begins to take on physical and organ damage after 70 hours of a weightless state. If the Earth person, as well as any other race to be classified as space mastering, wants to pursue spaceflight, then the spacecraft equipment must be adapted to the given conditions in all respects, as well as the spacesuits for the life forms themselves. Anyway, space travel is very, very dangerous, especially when it's done the way we're doing it here, which is a very, very crude kind of primitive way to go about space travel. This is a very unusual contact. It has a tremendous amount of topics. We've talked about Saturn's moons, Pope John Paul II, the Falkland Islands, Menachem Begum, Ayatollah Khomei, the Thule Society, the Oort cloud, the dangers of space travel, and next time we'll probably get a little bit into the expulsion of the Palestinians. I'll probably next show get back a little bit more into creation, the universal consciousness, and some of the information related to the spiritual teachings. I hope you've enjoyed the show tonight. I've enjoyed putting this together for you. There's a lot of material here, a lot of food for thought. Have a good evening. You've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We'll be back sometime this coming week. Have a good evening.